Hi, my name is Jeremy Greenberg. I'll be giving today's webinar a discussion about inventory. The main topic is going to be to discuss what's called the custom inventory calc. Now, the custom inventory calc is a very specific way of dealing with inventory. Before I go too deep into that, I want to sort of give some context and background about some of the standard ways of dealing with inventory. So basically, if someone just wants to keep things simple, theoretically they could put all of their inventory, whatever's in their warehouse, they can make it available for sale and send that inventory directly to eBay, Amazon, etc. As everyone knows, there's features in SellerCloud where you could have the same product listed more than once, not just on different channels, but even on the same channel. And ultimately, what ends up happening is that you could have, for every piece of inventory that's in your warehouse, you could theoretically have, 10 or 20 listings that people can actually purchase. That's great. You have a lot of exposure to increase your sales, but at the same time, people want to do it in a way where they can maximize their sales while also preventing as much as possible overselling or selling product that you can't get. As everyone knows, SellerCloud has a way to track your inventory physically that's in your warehouse separately from whatever the number that you're sending to the marketplace. So the best way to do things is really to have two different numbers. The number that you present to the public shouldn't be the exact number that's in your warehouse. First off, as orders come in, you have to reserve inventory for those orders. And even though the inventory is on the shelf in the warehouse, you don't want to obviously sell that inventory that's already reserved for the existing orders. But furthermore, we have ways of setting up safety quantities and whatnot. The safety quantity is basically a way of saying, as your inventory goes to a very low number, to say you can set a default per channel to reserve a certain amount of inventory so that the last unit or two will not be sold. Eventually, you can go on a product-by-product basis and, let's say, release that reserve on a particular product by setting a zero safety quantity. Similarly, we have, fixed price quantities, or what we call max quantities, where you can set a limit. So let's say you have 20 of something, that no customer is going to buy all 20 units. A typical item that people buy one or two of, you might want to only present, let's say, 10 of it as a maximum at any given point. So that way you have it exposed on maximum number of channels while at the same time not putting all the inventory out there and, limiting your exposure. So if one person comes by and buys 10, you have a chance to reduce the quantities on the other channels before, you sell 30 or 40 of them. Now, we similarly have features where if someone chooses and they want to actually sell inventory they don't have. So I was saying that sometimes you want to sell even inventory that you don't have in stock. We have a replenishable feature. We also have a pre-sell feature. So these are all features that are built into SellerCloud. You can configure them per channel differently. So depending on how you work, whether you can get inventory from your vendors right away or cross-stock and things like that, where you can sell pre-sell items, or whether or not you're very strict and you want to be very conservative with how much inventory you have various features like the safety quantity, the max quantity, and these are all documented on our help site. I don't want to go into too many details with that, but I'll show you a page and I'll send the link to everyone. Over here you see restricting inventory sent to channels. There's a series of links that go into more detailed articles. Within these things, there's a feature where you could set a percentage to sell on each channel. So theoretically, let's say you say, if you take 5 units and you want to multiply it by the 5 channels, theoretically that's 25 units of exposure. But if you only put 50% on each channel, then your chances of overselling go down as the inventory reduces naturally as you sell stuff. So that percentage gets recalculated, and likewise, it'll go from 5 to 2 to 1. Now, that particular setting is detailed over here, inventory percentages per channel. One detail to keep in mind is that it rounds down. So let's say if you have 50% of 1, it's going to be 0. If you have an odd number like 50% of 3, it's going to be 1. that's the way it's set up. So that way, obviously, you wouldn't want it to round up because you might provide more exposure. Now, this main discussion is about the custom inventory calc feature. What a lot of people requested over time was that they really don't want such a simple way of dealing with inventory. Like they might say, hey, you know what, really, if I have more than 20 of something, I really want to sell all of it. But as the inventory reduces, I want the percentage to change. So I don't want it to always be 50%. I only want it to be 50%, when I have one quantity, but then I want it to a more complicated recipe of how the inventory should work. That's where the custom inventory calc comes in. And I'm going to go into a little bit of detail. It's going to be maybe a little bit too much detail. So forgive me if it gets a little bit technical over here and the programmer in me takes over, but I'll just go first over a few different scenarios. So one example I just gave is, let's say you want the percentage to vary from, depending on, if you have 1,000 units, you don't want it to show 500. You want the percentage to vary based on some type of logic, or you have other factors you want to take into account, like let's say, or do you have an FBM listing, depending on whether the item's available on FBA, or you might want to make the FBM listing unavailable, and then all of a sudden when the FBA listing runs out, then you want to make the FBM listing available. So by basically bringing a product to zero, you can basically control whether it's available for sale. So that was one of the popular things that people asked for. Now, like I said, factoring whether it's available in the FBA warehouse, but there's also theoretically on a SKU by SKU basis, you might want to decide whether or not to factor in inventory from a particular warehouse, let's say the FBA warehouse or a dropship warehouse. Theoretically, you could have the custom calc factor in a certain flag or a certain property of a certain product and take that into account also to decide whether or not to make the product available or not. There are other features that people have asked for us to do in custom calc. Sometimes it involves replacement products. Very often people can set up replacement items so that, let's say they have a generic type of product that they're selling, and they might have an equivalent item that they inventory separately as a separate SKU. But from a selling perspective, they want to factor in additional inventory from the replacements. So Selling Cloud has the ability to set up those replacements, and using a custom calc, you can take into account that additional inventory so that the listing that's actually selling will never run out. Because in many channels, the longer the listing is active and running, the better search ranking it'll get. So that's another factor to take into account replacement items. Sometimes that gets a little bit complex when it comes to kits, where you have one component of the kit that has replacement items. We've done that as well. And then sometimes we've used the custom calc to restrict which products can actually be sold on a particular channel. So let's say we have a built-in feature in Seller Cloud that you can restrict a certain brand or a certain product. But if you want to create a general rule, like items from this brand can never be sold on eBay, so you can literally add rules into the custom calc to set inventory to zero under those circumstances. Or let's say a company says, hey, I don't want to sell a product unless I have at least this profit margin on the product. You could say if the cost of the item rises, then the custom calc can force the inventory to zero that's being sent to the channel based on those types of rules. So I'm going to actually log on to a server, show you how the custom calc works. And at this point, I can understand if some people lose me a little bit, but the custom calc is actually resides in the database. So it's something that certainly anyone with SQL, SQL experience, or a DBA type of person could definitely do it. Doesn't necessarily have to be done by a person who works at Seller Cloud, even though there are a number of people here who do work on it. One thing that is required is that you have a dedicated server in order to actually directly access the database to do such a change. Right now, I'm just going to actually log on to the server. So we have our own tool to go onto a test server, and I'll give you an example. Okay, once I'm on the server, I'd open up SQL Management Studio. In the Seller Cloud database, this custom inventory calc is done using something called a stored procedure. So each channel has a stored procedure named by the channel. Basically, the channel name, inventory, and then _S. Because basically, S stands for a selection. And basically, it's a little piece of code that looks something like this, if this makes any sense to anyone. But basically, what a stored procedure could do is that the program calls out this stored procedure, and then it gives it a SKU. So let's say I'm going to look for a C72, which is one of the scanners that we sell. And what happens is that all you do is you have a stored procedure, it calls a particular SKU, and it returns a value. In this particular case, it returns 1. Now, if you look at this particular example, it says if it's below cost, then the price, the current buy now price for this item is below the cost. Okay, so what I'm going to do right now is I'm going to actually log into SellerCloud for this account, and I'll show you what that looks like. I log in and I look for a particular product. So if I'm on the eBay properties page, you'll see this little calculator over here. This indicates that channel eBay is being controlled by a custom inventory calc. And it's giving back 1, which is the same value I saw in the database. Now, when I go to the actual client settings, I'll just show you where it actually configures this. See this little checkbox over here? This is where I've enabled this custom inventory calc on the client setting, and it's giving back a quantity of 1. Now, if I would reduce this price below cost, all of a sudden, then we'll show you how it's actually going to change the quantity for eBay based on some change of price of the item. So let's say I say it's $200, which is certainly below cost, and then I hit save. You're going to see the quantity for eBay went to 0 because it's factoring in the price when it decides how much quantity to send as a safeguard. So that's just a simple example. I'm going to go to the help site where I'm going to show you, we actually have an article specifically about the custom inventory calc. So we do have an article specifically about that, and we have some examples. Now, these examples, one of them is the first one about FBA, are some of the things that I mentioned before, that very often people don't want to be competing with themselves, and if they have the item in FBA, they'd rather it ship from FBA. Other times, it's a matter of whether or not to consider inventory for selling on other channels. For example, Walmart does not want people shipping goods from FBA. That's one of their policies. So the question often comes up, hey, I want to include FBA in my inventory when I sell on eBay, but when I sell on Walmart, I want to exclude the FBA inventory. So you could also, we have built-in feature to control for each channel which warehouses to pull from. But as these things get more and more complicated, the custom inventory calc basically gives you the ability to pretty much do anything. Every time, not only when it displays on the page, but when we actually send the inventory to the channel, we're going to run this bit of code and get whatever number you want. So like I said, this code is standard SQL code. It's pretty much the program is calling this specific piece of code, and if it doesn't get an answer that makes sense, then it just fails over to the old calculation that would have done otherwise. That's pretty much the general idea of it. Now, if, for example, you're not up to actually writing this code yourself, you could definitely, someone at SellerCloud could help you. Okay, so one person's asking, what triggers the stored procedure to run, and how often does it run? So basically, there are a few things that trigger it. When we do regular inventory updates, like if you enable your inventory quantity updates for eBay or for any channel, every time it tries to update your inventory, what it'll do is it'll download your active listings report, basically, and it'll go against each of these products and figure out, is there a product that has the wrong quantity on that channel? And then we'll update the ones that they need to be updated. We don't typically update every single product on the channel every time that thing cycles through. We'll try to update the items that need to be updated. Theoretically, every time you visit the web page also, it's going to run that stored procedure. Yeah, the stored procedure can be updated to accommodate any criteria. If you want, I'll give you an example of that. Let's say I say that the cost is zero. So let's say no one put in the cost, right? So we don't necessarily, we're not going to take that into account. So if you see over here, the site cost is available. So I could just go over here and I could write my site cost is not equal to zero. That's what that symbol means. And then I just execute the stored procedure, and then it'll run using the latest code. Every time someone makes a change to this, they should probably keep track, because basically you wipe out whatever was there beforehand. What we typically do is we create when we do things internally, we have a way of filing all of the changes and keeping track of the versions. And we've done actually well over 100 of these types of calcs in the past. Also, just I want to point out is just like we have the inventory calc, we have other types of calcs in our system as well, like for managing prices based on various rules, and also managing latency or ship time, also based on various rules. You could theoretically vary the latency depending on the calendar or time of day of the order, so that at a certain time of the day you would extend the latency by another day. Or we have some people who also factor in certain warehouses based on, they vary the price based on where they're actually sourcing the inventory from. Let's see some other questions here. Someone seems to be asking a question about when I import a shipment, why wouldn't you want to just put out your current inventory to the channel? Well, at the beginning, I tried to explain that if you put all of the inventory that's in your warehouse and make it available on the channel, then you might be unnecessarily exposing yourself to overselling, because unless you sell on one channel with one SKU, it's very likely that your exposure is going to be much greater than the amount of inventory you have in your warehouse. And typically people on a marketplace, most orders for most of our sellers are one or two quantity, and there's really, if you put all of your inventory out at the same time, there's really not much to gain, and you have what to lose. Does inventory calc work for all channels? It works for all of the main channels. There are some new channels that we add that don't yet have it, and we do it on a case-by-case basis. All the major channels, certainly we have that option. We always have new channels that are in the works, and I can't guarantee you that every single one has it. You'll basically see a separate checkbox on the client settings, and if you don't see the checkbox there, that probably means that we don't have it yet. Someone over here is asking a question about just general inventory feeds and how they're sent to eBay and how this factors into that. So typically what happens is, like I said, we grab an active listings report, and on a scheduled basis, let's say every half an hour, or depending on how many SKUs you have, it might be an hour, we will actually send up the changes that need to be made. Typically bring your inventory down, reducing your inventory. That being said, we also are importing your orders into Seller Cloud. Typically every half an hour, we get a sold report and bring your orders in. Now, depending on how quickly your orders sell, they might actually sell faster than that cycle. So we have an additional step where we grab your pending orders, which means orders that are not yet created in Seller Cloud, and we try to factor those in as well, and to reduce the amount that we're sending. So as we're calculating the amount to send, let's say you said you had 10 and now you have 5. So we'll say we're going to try to update eBay with 5, but then we notice that you have 2 pending orders. So then we're going to send, 3. So those are different safeguards, but it's not 100% perfect. That's why the safety quantity and these percentages are also important. So that way, if let's say you would only be sending 75% of the inventory, you wouldn't be sending 3, you'd maybe be sending 2. And that's important, because by the time we send the 2 to eBay, not only are we not getting the orders in real time, eBay and these other marketplaces like Amazon, they also take time to process the feeds as well. Typically what happens, let's say on Amazon, is a customer places an order, and for half an hour after that order is placed, you can't even ship the order because the order is pending. And Amazon does some type of fraud check on the order. They verify everything. And at the point where the order appears on your order report is at the point where it's shippable. And, what actually happens from the buyer perspective is that if you buy something on Amazon, you could actually cancel it without contacting the seller. But after that half-hour period is over and they've done the verification, you actually have to contact the third-party seller in order to cancel the order. So there's a certain, even though, everyone would love it if it was completely real time, but the reality is that the marketplaces themselves are not exactly real time. And if I send a feed to Amazon to update something, they're not going to process it the same second either. So what happens is we have to have a certain give and make certain estimates and try to prevent problems, but we can't completely eliminate them. That being said, if you have certain products that have a high velocity, you could put into your custom inventory calc to say that if this product sells at a certain rate, like a speed, then be more aggressive or more conservative on the amount of the safety quantity, or have an even smaller percentage that you make available to the marketplace. So these are types of things that have to sort of be fine-tuned for each particular customer, and it's not a one-size-fits-all, and that's why we have it done in this way that it can be adjusted. Now, it could be certain products are more delicate to overselling than others, so you could segment your products. You could have basically like if statements in the SQL script that takes into account, that's much more conservative with the products that are more sensitive to that. Let me look at the next question. How do you view pending orders, and how often does it run? So the pending order check for eBay, for Amazon, runs every 15 minutes. You can actually see the pending orders on the inventory movement screen. I have an example on my test company over here, but if you go to any product and you go to the inventory movement, so over here you can actually see, you just like you see regular orders that are taking place, you would see pending orders that are happening as well. The same is true with reserves. If there's a reserved order on FBA, you'd see it on that inventory movement page as well. There's someone over here who says, what should I do if I only have one unit of a product? Well, my advice would be is if you only have one unit of a product, to only sell it on a single channel. The moment if you have a product that's some collector's item or something that you can't actually buy if you oversell it, then you're obviously taking some kind of risk by putting it in two different marketplaces. Like I said, someone could buy it on Amazon and the order might be pending. By the time we update eBay, that same person might have decided that they want two of the same thing and found it on eBay and bought it also. So there's no real way for, to completely eliminate it as quickly as we update things. If it's really at high risk, I would say find the channel where you sell it the best and just sell it there if you only have one unit of it. Basically, I think we ran out of time over here. I'm going to go through the various questions and have some type of follow-up, whether it's in the form of email or a follow-up discussion. I hope everyone enjoyed this, and please let me know if there's any other topics you want to discuss. We could discuss something tomorrow or next week, whatever you want. I'm happy to share this information, and hopefully it gives some clarity to people. Okay, have a good day.